A single drop of crimson wine, a pristine white shirt, and the coldest eyes she had ever seen. For Victoria Vance, her first day as a waitress at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant was about to become her last. Across the table, Billionaire CEO Nathaniel Blackwood, a man who built empires and crushed rivals before breakfast, uttered the two words that would shatter her world. "You're fired." But clutched in her trembling hand was a secret she'd guarded for years. A faded, sealed letter. She never imagined she'd have to use it like this, as a weapon of last resort. What could possibly be written in that old envelope that could stop a titan in his tracks and rewrite their destinies in a single, heart-stopping moment? The answer would change everything. The air inside the pinnacle was different. It wasn't just the temperature, meticulously controlled to a precise 71 degrees Fahrenheit. It was the weight of the atmosphere itself. It smelled of old money, new ambition, and a faint, floral perfume that probably cost more than Victoria Vance's entire wardrobe. Crystal glasses shimmered under recessed lighting, catching the fire of the city lights that glittered through the panoramic, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park 60 stories below. The gentle clinking of silver on porcelain was the room's primary percussion, a delicate rhythm set against the hushed murmur of powerful conversations. This was not a restaurant. It was a stage, and every person here was playing a role. For Victoria, or Tori, as her late mother used to call her, the role was invisible servant. It was her first day, and the crisp black uniform felt like a costume for a part she hadn't properly rehearsed. Her nerves were a frantic symphony in her chest. Mr. Peterson, the restaurant's general manager, had a face carved from granite and a voice that could curdle cream. His final words to her before service began echoed in her mind. "At the Pinnacle, we don't make mistakes. We create experiences. A single error can ruin a multi-million-dollar deal being discussed over our Dover sole. Do not be that error, Miss Vance." Tori desperately needed this job. Her mother's medical bills had devoured every last cent of their savings, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a hollow ache in Tori's heart. The small apartment she lived in was threatening to swallow her whole, with final notice letters acting as daily reminders of her precarious situation. This job, with its rumored phenomenal tips, wasn't just a lifeline. It was the only boat in a raging sea. She moved through the dining room with a practiced grace she didn't feel, her mind a frantic checklist of orders, table numbers, and faces. Table 7 needed more water. Table 3 was ready for dessert menus. And Table 12 was the sun around which the entire restaurant seemed to orbit. At its head sat Nathaniel Blackwood. Even from across the room, his presence was an undeniable force of gravity. He wasn't loud or ostentatious. He was the opposite. His stillness was what drew the eye. Dressed in a flawlessly tailored dark suit, with hair the color of midnight and a jawline that looked like it could cut diamonds, he exuded an aura of absolute control. He was the owner of Blackwood Global Enterprises, the conglomerate that owned this very building, this very restaurant, and 100 other ventures across the globe. His face was a regular feature on the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, always with a headline that spoke of ruthless acquisitions and market domination. They called him the Black Wolf of Wall Street. Tonight he was entertaining a guest, a portly man with a florid face and a booming laugh that was just a little too loud for the refined space. Tori's briefing identified him as Reginald Harrison, a potential investor for a new, massive tech merger. This wasn't just dinner. It was corporate warfare fought with wine lists and filet mignon. Tori's heart hammered against her ribs when Mr. Peterson gave her the silent nod. It was her turn to serve Table 12, specifically, to pour the wine. Not just any wine. A 1998 Chateau Margaux. Mr. Peterson had whispered its price, and Tori had felt the blood drain from her face. It cost more than her car, more than 4 months of her rent. "Steady hands, Miss Vance," Peterson had hissed as she approached the table, his eyes boring into her. She took a deep, fortifying breath, her palm slightly slick against the cool, heavy bottle. She approached the table from Mr. Harrison's right, just as she'd been trained. She presented the bottle to Nathaniel Blackwood, who gave a curt, dismissive nod without even looking at her. His focus was entirely on his guest. "The infrastructure is already in place, Reginald," Nathaniel was saying, his voice a low, confident baritone. "The moment we sign, the transition will be seamless." Tori tilted the bottle, the dark, ruby liquid flowing in a perfect, silent stream into Mr. Harrison's glass. One down. She moved around to Nathaniel. Her hands were trembling now, a fine, almost imperceptible tremor. She could feel his proximity, the faint, clean scent of his cologne, something crisp and expensive, like sandalwood and ice. She focused on the glass, on the rising tide of red. That's when it happened. A busboy, rushing to clear a nearby table, stumbled slightly. His hip jostled Tori's elbow. It was a minor bump, a flicker of movement that in any other circumstance would have gone unnoticed. But here, in this high-stakes ballet of perfection, it was a cataclysm. The neck of the bottle jerked. A small, perfect arc of crimson wine flew through the air, defying gravity for a split second before landing squarely on the pristine white canvas of Nathaniel Blackwood's shirt. Silence. It was not a loud silence. It was a dense, heavy vacuum that sucked all the air and sound from the 60-story-high room. Every hushed conversation, every clink of cutlery, ceased. Mr. Harrison's jaw hung agape. Mr. Peterson looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. The crimson stain on Nathaniel's shirt was a blooming, grotesque flower. It spread slowly, seeping into the fine Egyptian cotton. Tori stood frozen, the bottle still in her hand, her mind a complete and utter blank. Time seemed to stretch and warp. She saw the stain, she saw the shocked faces, but her brain couldn't process the sequence of events. Then Nathaniel Blackwood, slowly, deliberately, lifted his gaze from his ruined shirt and met her eyes. His eyes were not angry. Anger would have been a mercy. Anger was a hot, human emotion. His eyes were chips of slate-grey ice. They held a cold, profound emptiness, a chilling assessment of her worthlessness that cut her deeper than any shouted insult ever could. He looked at her not as a person, but as a malfunctioning piece of equipment. An error. The very error Mr. Peterson had warned her about. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The entire room hung on his every breath. He placed his napkin calmly on the table, dabbed at the stain once, with a gesture of pure futility, and then looked past Tori, his eyes locking onto the petrified Mr. Peterson. His voice, when it came, was quiet, clear, and absolutely final. "Get her out of my sight." The words, though spoken softly, detonated in the silent room like a bomb. "Get her out of my sight." It was not a request. It was an imperial command, an edict from a king in his court. For Tori, the world narrowed to a terrifying tunnel. At the end of it were Nathaniel Blackwood's merciless grey eyes. The rest of the restaurant, the glittering city lights, the shocked faces of the patrons, it all blurred into an indistinct swirl of judgment. Mr. Peterson was at her side in an instant, his face pale and his jaw tight with a mixture of professional panic and fury. He snatched the wine bottle from her nerveless fingers. "My deepest apologies, Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Harrison. Unacceptable. Completely unacceptable." Reginald Harrison, recovering from his shock, began to bluster. "Unacceptable? It's a disaster. A $5,000 shirt, I'd wager. And the nerve. What kind of establishment are you running here, Nathaniel? He looked at Tori with utter disdain, as if she were a piece of vermin that had scurried out from under the baseboards. Nathaniel ignored him. He also ignored Mr. Peterson's frantic apologies. His gaze remained locked on Tori, pinning her in place. He saw her trembling, her wide, terrified eyes, the flush of shame coloring her cheeks. He saw it all, and it registered with the emotional impact of a line item on a balance sheet, a liability to be removed. "It will be handled," Nathaniel said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. He then addressed Mr. Peterson directly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation or appeal. "She's fired. I don't want to see her in this building again. Escort her out. Now." Fired. The word struck Tori with the physical force of a blow. It wasn't just the loss of a job she'd had for less than 6 hours. It was the public humiliation, the finality of his pronouncement, the crushing weight of her failure. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and shameful. She had to say something, explain that it wasn't entirely her fault, that the busboy had bumped her. "Mr. Blackwood, she began, her voice a pathetic croak. "Do not speak to me," he cut her off, the words as sharp and cold as shards of glass. He didn't even look at her as he said it, already turning his attention back to Mr. Harrison, a seamless transition back to the business at hand. "As I was saying, Reginald, the quarterly projections are conservative. We anticipate a 20% growth in the first year alone." It was the ultimate dismissal. In the span of 30 seconds, she had gone from a person to an obstacle, and now to nothing at all. She was erased. Mr. Peterson's hand gripped her upper arm, his fingers digging in with surprising strength. "Come with me, Miss Vance." His voice was a low, furious hiss meant only for her. "You have done quite enough damage for one evening." He began to pull her away from the table, a slow, humiliating walk of shame through the silent, staring dining room. Every eye was on her. She could feel their gazes like insects crawling on her skin, a mixture of pity, scorn, and morbid curiosity. She was the night's entertainment, the cautionary tale whispered about over coffee and dessert, the waitress who spilled wine on the black wolf. Her mind raced. The rent, the debt, the suffocating feeling of being utterly, hopelessly alone. Her mother's face swam in her vision, her gentle smile, the promise Tori had made to her on her deathbed. A promise that was now turning to dust. "Please," she whispered to Mr. Peterson, her voice breaking. "It was an accident." The busboy. "Silence!" he commanded, his face a mask of cold professionalism. Mr. Blackwood gave an order. "My job is to follow it. Your job, as of 10 seconds ago, ceased to exist." They reached the swinging doors to the kitchen, a blessed escape from the hundreds of judging eyes. But the kitchen was no sanctuary. The staff, who had heard the commotion, fell silent as she was marched through. Cooks paused with ladles in mid-air. Dishwashers stopped their work, their faces a mixture of shock and a grim, "There but for the grace of God go I." Understanding. They didn't stop at the staff lockers. Mr. Peterson propelled her straight towards the service exit, a grim metal door that led to a back alley. "Your final check will be mailed to you," he said, his tone clipped and final. He released her arm, pushing her slightly towards the door. "Your personal effects from your locker will be sent along with it. Now leave." The finality of it all crashed down on her. This couldn't be how it ended. It couldn't. All her hopes, pinned on this one job, extinguished by a clumsy elbow and a drop of wine. Panic, raw and desperate, clawed its way up her throat, and with it, another memory surfaced. The promise. The reason she had sought out a job at a Blackwood Global Property in the first place. Her worn leather satchel, her only personal item they'd allowed her to keep on the floor, was slung over her shoulder. Inside it, nestled between her wallet and a cheap paperback, was the reason for everything. A faded, cream-colored envelope. "Wait," she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a desperation that overshadowed her fear. "I need to give him something. It's important." Mr. Peterson actually let out a short, harsh laugh. "You think you're in any position to make demands? You are less than nothing to him. You are a bad memory he's already forgotten. Get out before I call security and have you removed for trespassing." He opened the service door, and the cold, damp air of the alley, smelling of garbage and rain, washed over her. It was the smell of defeat. He was already turning away, dismissing her for the second time that night. No, she couldn't let it end this way. Her mother's last wish, the weight of her promise. It was more than just a job on the line now, it was a matter of honor. With a surge of adrenaline, Tori spun around, not towards the alley, but back towards the kitchen, towards the dining room, towards the man who had just destroyed her. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound, shaky resolve. "Not until he sees this." Her hand dove into her satchel, her fingers closing around the worn, familiar paper of the envelope. It was a fool's errand, a mad gamble, but it was the only card she had left to play. The envelope felt both impossibly fragile and incredibly heavy in her hand. Its edges were soft and worn from the countless times Tori had taken it out, just to look at it, to feel the weight of the promise it contained. The cream-colored paper had yellowed with age, and the blue ink of the addressee's name, Mr. Nathaniel Blackwood, was slightly faded, written in a graceful, looping cursive that was as familiar to Tori as her own reflection. It was her mother's handwriting. This letter was the true reason she was standing in this temple of gastronomy, dressed in a uniform she couldn't afford. It was the culmination of a deathbed promise made 3 months ago in a sterile hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. Her mother, Sophia Vance, had been a hospice nurse for 25 years. She was a woman of quiet strength and profound empathy, who saw her work not as a job, but as a calling to shepherd souls through their final journey. And nearly 2 decades ago, one of those souls had been a young woman named Catherine. Tori had grown up hearing stories about Catherine. She wasn't just a patient to her mother. She had become a dear friend in the last year of her life. Catherine was vibrant, artistic, and full of a light that even a terminal illness couldn't fully extinguish. She was also, as Tori later learned, Nathaniel Blackwood's wife, the great love of his life, taken from him far too soon. "He changed after she died," Sophia had told Tori, her voice thin and reedy in those final days. "He was always intense, always driven. But Catherine, she was his heart, Tori." She softened his edges. When he lost her, he encased his heart in ice so it could never be broken again. On her last coherent day, Sophia had pressed the letter into Tori's hand. "I promised her," she'd whispered, her breath catching. "I promised I would give this to him. But he disappeared after the funeral, walled himself off. I tried to find the right time, but I was a coward. I was intimidated. And now my time is up." Tears had streamed down Tori's face. "What is it, Mum?" "It's her last words to him," Sophia had explained. Things she couldn't say. A wish she had. "She made me promise, Tori. Find him. Give this to him. It's the last thing I'll ever ask of you. Don't let my last promise go unkept." And so, after her mother passed and the debts began to pile up, Tori had formed a desperate plan. She couldn't get through the corporate fortress of Blackwood Global. But she had heard Nathaniel Blackwood dined at the Pinnacle, his crown jewel restaurant, almost every week. It was his sanctuary, his command post. If she could get a job there, any job, she could wait for the right moment, a quiet evening, a lull in service, and approach him respectfully. She would fulfill her mother's last wish, and maybe, just maybe, earn enough to keep her head above water in the process. The plan now seemed ludicrously naive. There was no right moment. There was only this, the worst possible moment. She had been fired, humiliated, and was seconds away from being thrown into an alley. Her grand plan had culminated in a ruined shirt and public disgrace. Back in the service corridor, Mr. Peterson stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "What did you say?" "I have something for him," Tori repeated, her voice gaining a sliver of strength as she held up the envelope. The sight of her mother's handwriting gave her courage. "It's personal. It's something he needs to see. I promised." Peterson's expression was one of pure disbelief, which quickly hardened into annoyance. "Are you deaf, Ms. Vance? Your association with this establishment is over. I am not going to allow you to go back in there and harass Mr. Blackwood further. Security!" He barked towards a house phone on the wall. Panic seized her. Once security arrived, it would be over. They would physically remove her. She would never get close to him again. Her mother's disappointed face flashed in her mind. It was now or never. Before Peterson could lift the receiver, Tori acted. Fueled by a wild, reckless energy, she bolted. She pushed past the stunned manager and burst back through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The staff yelled in surprise as she dodged prep stations and hot pans, a blur of black and white against the stainless steel. "Stop her!" Peterson roared from behind her. She didn't look back. She flew through the kitchen's far doors and emerged, breathless, back into the opulent dining room. The atmosphere, which had just begun to settle back into a low murmur, once again fell into a shocked hush. Patrons gasped. Forks froze halfway to mouths. All eyes snapped back to the disgraced waitress who was now making a scene. Nathaniel Blackwood, who had been smoothing things over with his investor, looked up. The icy calm on his face finally fractured, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. His eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. This was no longer an error. This was an act of defiance, an attack on his control. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice boomed, no longer quiet, but filled with a power that vibrated through the room. Two burly security guards, alerted by Peterson's shout, were now converging on her from the main entrance. Tori could see them out of the corner of her eye. Big men in black suits moving with purpose. She had seconds. She ignored the guards, ignored the gasps, and locked her eyes on Nathaniel. She walked directly towards table 12, her steps quick and determined. She didn't run. She walked with the strange dignity of someone with nothing left to lose. She held the faded envelope out in front of her like a shield. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice loud and clear in the silent room. It didn't tremble. "I was fired. I accept that. But I have to give you this. I promised." She was 5 feet from the table when the first guard reached her, his hand clamping down on her arm. "Mum, you need to come with us now." "Get her out of here," Nathaniel snarled, rising slightly from his chair, his patience utterly gone. But Tori just pushed the letter forward, her arm outstretched, her gaze unwavering on his face. "Please," she pleaded, not for her job, but for something far more important. "Just look at the name on the envelope. Please." The security guard's grip was like iron, pulling her backward. Tori stumbled, her frantic mission about to end in failure just inches from her goal. Nathaniel Blackwood had already turned away in disgust, a clear signal that the disturbance was beneath his notice and was to be dealt with by his subordinates. He considered the matter closed. "Sir, please just look," Tori cried out, her voice filled with a desperate sincerity that cut through the tension in the room. "The handwriting. You'll recognize the handwriting." Perhaps it was the sheer, insane persistence in her voice. Perhaps it was the mention of the handwriting. For a reason he would never be able to articulate, Nathaniel paused. He threw a final, irritated glance over his shoulder, his eyes intending to dismiss her one last time. But his gaze fell not on her face, but on the aged, cream-colored envelope she held out like a desperate offering. And the world stopped turning. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was a visceral, involuntary reaction, a jolt that went through him like an electric current. He knew that elegant, looping script better than he knew his own signature. He had seen it on countless little notes left on his pillow, on birthday cards, on love letters penned during their brief times apart. It was a handwriting he had not seen in 17 years, a handwriting he never expected to see again in his life. Catherine's. "Let her go," he said, his voice suddenly hoarse. The security guard, caught off guard by the abrupt reversal, hesitated. "Sir?" I said. "Let her go," Nathaniel repeated, his voice sharper now, though the fury had been replaced by a strange, unreadable intensity. He took a step forward, his eyes glued to the envelope, his entire universe having shrunk to that single, fragile piece of paper. The guard released Tori's arm. She swayed for a moment, catching her breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't dare move, simply kept her hand outstretched, the letter a silent testament between them. Nathaniel closed the remaining distance in 2 long strides. His hand, usually so steady when signing 9-figure deals, trembled slightly as he reached out and took the envelope from her. The paper felt impossibly delicate in his powerful grip. He turned it over. It was sealed with a simple wax stamp, a small, faded daisy pressed into it, her favorite flower. A wave of dizziness washed over him. Memories he had buried under 17 years of ruthless work and calculated ambition came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. Catherine in their garden, laughing, with sunlight in her hair. Catherine, frail but smiling in a hospital bed, her hand in his. The crushing, suffocating emptiness of the world after she was gone. "Where?" he managed to say, his voice a ragged whisper. "Did you get this?" Before Tori could answer, Reginald Harrison, indignant at the interruption of their deal, stood up. "Nathaniel, what is this nonsense? Are we going to let some hysterical waitress derail a billion-dollar merger? Have your men throw her out so we can conclude our business?" Nathaniel didn't even turn his head. "The meeting is over, Reginald," he said, his voice distant, his focus entirely on the object in his hand. "What? Over? Don't be ridiculous. We were about to—" "Jeffrey will call you to reschedule," Nathaniel stated with chilling finality. "Leave." It was not a suggestion. Harrison, his face turning a shade of purple, sputtered for a moment. But the look on Nathaniel's face, a look of dangerous, profound disruption, was enough to silence him. He gathered his briefcase with an offended huff and stormed away, casting a venomous glare at Tori as he left. Nathaniel was oblivious. He looked from the envelope to Tori's face, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw not an incompetent employee, but a messenger from a ghost. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice softer now. "My name is Victoria Vance. My mother was Sophia Vance. She was your wife's nurse," Tori explained, her own voice barely a whisper. "She gave this to me. It was her dying wish that I give it to you. My mother passed away 3 months ago. Sophia. He remembered the name. A kind, quiet woman who had shown Catherine such tenderness in those horrific final months. A woman he hadn't thought of in years. Without another word, he turned and walked away from the table, away from the silent, watching restaurant. He strode towards a private elevator tucked away in a discreet corner of the dining room. He stopped at the door and looked back at Tori, who stood frozen and uncertain in the middle of the floor. "You, with me," he commanded. Tori hesitated for a fraction of a second before following him. Mr. Peterson intercepted her, his face a mess of confusion. "Miss Vance is what is—" "She is with me," Nathaniel said, silencing the manager with a single look. The elevator doors slid open into a richly appointed private office. It was a smaller, more intimate version of the restaurant below, with a large mahogany desk, leather armchairs, and the same breathtaking view of the city. But Nathaniel didn't look at the view. He walked to his desk, his movements stiff and unnatural. He stared at the letter, turning it over and over in his hands. He felt a profound sense of dread and a desperate, aching hope. With a deep, shuddering breath, he carefully broke the 17-year-old seal. The wax crumbled under his thumb. He unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The same elegant script filled the page. He began to read. "My dearest Nathaniel, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and my dear friend Sophia has finally worked up the courage to deliver it. Please forgive her for the delay. I told her to wait until she felt the time was right. I am writing this because there are things I need to say, things that the morphine and the weakness make it so hard to articulate now. Things I need you to know, to carry with you when I cannot be there myself." Tori watched as every ounce of color drained from Nathaniel Blackwood's face. The infamous corporate raider, the man they called the Black Wolf, stumbled back into his high-backed leather chair as if his legs could no longer support him. His knuckles were white where he gripped the letter. A sound escaped his lips, a choked, guttural noise that was halfway between a gasp and a sob. The mask of the ruthless billionaire didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. In its place was the face of a man staring into the ghost of his own heart, and the unsent confession it held was tearing him apart. The office was so quiet that Tori could hear the faint hum of the city traffic 60 stories below, and the ragged sound of Nathaniel Blackwood's breathing. He sat hunched over his desk, the letter trembling in his hands, his gaze fixed on the faded blue ink. He was no longer in his sterile, powerful office. He was transported back 17 years to a sunlit room filled with the scent of lilies and the quiet beeping of medical machines. Catherine's voice, not the frail whisper of her final days, but the vibrant, laughing voice he fell in love with, echoed in his mind as he read her words. "My dearest Nathaniel, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and my dear friend Sophia has finally worked up the courage to deliver it. Please forgive her for the delay. I told her to wait until she felt the time was right. I am writing this because there are things I need to say, things that the morphine and the weakness make it so hard to articulate now. Things I need you to know, to carry with you when I cannot be there myself. I see the way you look at me, my love, with so much pain and a fierce, desperate desire to fix what cannot be fixed. I see the armor you are building around your heart, piece by piece, every time a doctor gives us bad news. You think it protects you, but I fear it will become a prison. You were always so driven, so focused on building, on conquering. I loved that fire in you, but I also loved the man who would spend an entire Sunday with me in the park, doing nothing at all. the man who would laugh until he cried at a stupid movie. I'm afraid that when I'm gone, you'll forget that man exists. I'm afraid you will let the fire consume everything else." Nathaniel squeezed his eyes shut. He remembered those Sundays. He remembered her laughter. He had not truly laughed, not in that pure, unburdened way, since she had been gone. He had mistaken success for happiness, acquisition for fulfillment. He had built an empire of glass and steel on top of her memory, hoping its sheer height would make him forget the gaping emptiness at its foundation. He continued reading. "That's why I have to tell you about my secret. Don't worry, it's not another man. You have always been my only one. My secret is a project. Remember that old community center in the Lower East Side? The one we passed on our walks, with the crumbling facade and the children playing in a cracked concrete yard? I've been working with a small group, planning. I used the money from my grandmother's inheritance. We bought the building, Nathaniel. Quietly. The deed is in a file with my solicitor. My plan, my dream, was to turn it into a haven, a place for art and music for underprivileged children, a place with a real garden, not a concrete yard, a place of creation and hope. Sophia, your waitress's mother, a woman with a heart of pure gold, was going to help me run it. We called it the Daisy Chain Project, after our silly favorite flower. It was meant to be a surprise for you. I wanted to show you that we could build things that weren't skyscrapers, things that didn't have a stock price but were infinitely valuable. But my time ran out. The project is just a folder of plans and a deed to a decaying building. And this is my last wish, my love. It is my confession and my plea. Don't let my last dream die with me. Don't let your world become only boardrooms and balance sheets. Please find that file. Look at the plans. Build something that grows, not just something that towers. Build something for them, for the children. Do it for me. Don't let the black wolf devour the Nathaniel I love. Live a life filled with more than just victory. Live a life filled with joy. Find it in small things. Find it in helping others. Promise me you will try. I love you. I will always, always love you. Forever yours, Catherine. A single tear escaped his tightly shut eye and traced a path down his cheek, landing on the word love. The paper buckled slightly where the moisture hit. 17 years of suppressed grief, of channeled rage, of deliberate, willful numbness came undone. The fortress he had so carefully constructed around his heart was breached, and the flood of sorrow was overwhelming. He wasn't crying for her death. He had done that in private until he had no tears left. He was crying for the man he had become, the man she had feared he would be. He had honored her memory by becoming relentlessly successful, thinking that was what she would have wanted. He had amassed wealth and power beyond imagination, all of it a monument to her. But he had gotten it all wrong. She didn't want a monument of stone. She wanted a garden. He had become a caricature of himself, the Black Wolf, a man who could fire a terrified young woman over a spilled glass of wine without a second thought, a man who would value a merger with a pompous fool like Harrison over a moment of human decency. Catherine would have been horrified. She would have been the first to rush to Tori's side, to reassure her it was okay, to laugh it off. He slowly, carefully folded the letter and placed it on the desk as if it were a sacred relic. He took a deep, shuddering breath and looked up at Tori. She stood by the door, her face a portrait of apprehension and empathy. She had not come here for a job. She had come here as the executor of a ghost's will, to deliver a message he hadn't known he was desperate to hear. She had braved his fury and his guards and his entire intimidating world to keep a promise her mother had made to his wife. "Your mother," Nathaniel started, his voice thick with emotion. "Sophia Vance. She was a wonderful woman. Catherine adored her." "She spoke of your wife all the time," Tori said softly. "She said Mrs. Blackwood had more light in her than a whole field of sunflowers." A sad smile touched Nathaniel's lips. "She did." He fell silent for a long moment, the weight of 17 lost years pressing down on him. 17 years of living the wrong life, of chasing the wrong prize. The letter hadn't just brought Catherine's memory back. It had held up a mirror to his soul, and he was shattered by the reflection. He had become the very thing she had begged him not to be. The silence in the office stretched, but it was no longer the tense, angry silence of before. It was a heavy, contemplative quiet, filled with the ghosts of unspoken words and the weight of a 17-year-old letter. Nathaniel stared at the folded paper on his desk, then at the young woman who had brought it to him. He saw the frayed edge of her uniform's cuff, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the quiet dignity that had allowed her to face him down. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a link to a life he had lost, a keeper of a promise that could redeem him. He picked up his phone, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't call security. He didn't call his legal team. He scrolled through his contacts to a name he hadn't called in years, for anything other than business. "Jeffrey." An older man's voice answered on the first ring. "Nathaniel, it's late. Is everything all right with the Harrison deal?" Jeffrey Price was Nathaniel's oldest friend and the chief counsel for Blackwood Global. He was one of the few people left who remembered Nathaniel before the Empire, before the Black Wolf persona, before Catherine's death. "The Harrison deal is off," Nathaniel said, his voice flat. The decision was instantaneous, effortless. Reginald Harrison and his billion-dollar merger seemed utterly insignificant now. "Jeffrey, I need to ask you something. Do you remember Catherine's nurse, Sophia Vance?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sophia? Of course. A lovely woman. The kindest soul. Why? Her daughter is here. She brought me a letter. From Catherine." The silence on the line was now profound. "A letter? From Catherine? Nathaniel, what are you talking about?" It was her last one. A wish she had. "Jeffrey, she bought that old community center on Stanton Street, the one she was always talking about." "My God," Jeffrey breathed. "The Daisy Chain Project. I remember. She was so excited about it. We all thought the plans got lost, that the idea died with her. You never mentioned it." "Because I never knew," Nathaniel admitted, the confession costing him a piece of his pride, but liberating a part of his soul. "She kept it a secret. She wanted to surprise me. She wanted me to build it." He looked across the office at Tori, who was watching him with a wide-eyed, uncertain expression. "Her nurse was supposed to give me the letter, but she lost her nerve. Her daughter Victoria just gave it to me." "Nathaniel," Jeffrey's voice was filled with a concern that transcended their professional relationship. "Are you all right?" "No," Nathaniel said honestly. "I don't think I've been all right for 17 years. He took a deep breath. "Jeffrey, find Catherine's old files, the ones from her personal solicitor. I want everything you can find on the Daisy Chain Project. The deed, the architectural plans, her notes, everything. I want it on my desk by morning." "Consider it done," Jeffrey replied without hesitation. "Nathaniel, I'm glad she found you." Nathaniel hung up the phone, and looked at Tori, his eyes clear for the first time that night. The cold, assessing gaze of the CEO was gone, replaced by something raw, human, and deeply sorrowful. "Ms. Vance, Victoria," he corrected himself. "I don't have the words to properly express my apology. What I did tonight, how I treated you, was inexcusable. It was arrogant, cruel, and everything Catherine feared I would become." Tori didn't know what to say. She just nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "You came here to honor your mother's promise, and I met you with contempt," he continued, standing and walking around the desk towards her. "You have shown more courage and integrity tonight than I have in nearly 2 decades. Your mother would be incredibly proud of you." The mention of her mother's pride made Tori's eyes well up with tears she refused to let fall. I just had to keep my promise," she whispered. "You did more than that," he said, his voice soft. "You delivered a message I desperately needed to hear, even if I didn't know it. You've given me a gift beyond measure, a second chance to get things right." He stopped in front of her. "I fired you from a job you don't deserve. Being a waitress here, serving men like Reginald Harrison and myself, it's not for you. I have a different proposal." Tori looked at him, confused. "A proposal?" "This project," he said, gesturing to the letter on his desk. "Catherine's dream. The Daisy Chain Project. For 17 years it has been nothing but a decaying building and a folder of forgotten plans. I want to build it. I want to fund it with everything it needs to be 1,000 times better than she ever dreamed. But I can't do it alone. I need someone to run it. Someone who understands the spirit of it. Someone connected to its heart." He looked her directly in the eye. "I need someone like you. I want to offer you the position of Executive Director of the Blackwood Foundation's new flagship project. You won't be serving wine anymore, Victoria. You'll be building hope. You'll be fulfilling your mother's dream right alongside my wife's." Tori was speechless. The offer was so immense, so far beyond the realm of anything she could have imagined, that her mind couldn't process it. An hour ago, she was a disgraced waitress being thrown into an alley. Now, a billionaire was offering her a chance to change the world, all because of a faded letter. I don't know anything about running a foundation," she stammered. "You know how to keep a promise," he replied simply. "You have integrity and courage. I can hire people to handle the paperwork. I can't hire heart. That's what you bring. That's what your mother and Catherine brought. Please, say yes." A different kind of wealth, he thought. For years he had measured his life in stock prices, market caps, and acquisitions. Catherine's letter, delivered by this brave young woman, had shown him the bankruptcy of that mindset. True wealth was a kept promise, a dream fulfilled, a life lived with purpose and joy. It was a currency he was finally ready to start earning. 6 months later, the view from the 60-story window was the same, but the world Victoria Vance saw through it was entirely different. She stood not in a waitress uniform, but in a smart business suit, holding a tablet with architectural renderings. Beside her, Nathaniel Blackwood looked over her shoulder, not with the cold distance of a CEO, but with the collaborative warmth of a partner. Tori had accepted his offer. The first few weeks had been a whirlwind of lawyers, accountants, and city planners, a world so foreign to her that she felt like she was constantly on the verge of drowning. But Nathaniel had been true to his word. He surrounded her with a capable team, but he made it clear that she was in charge. Her voice, her vision, guided by Catherine's old notes and her own innate empathy, was the ultimate authority. The decaying building on Stanton Street was now a hive of activity. The crumbling facade had been restored, revealing beautiful old brickwork. Inside, walls were coming down to create bright, open art studios and soundproofed music rooms. The cracked concrete yard in the back had been demolished. In its place, truckloads of rich, dark soil were being brought in for the new garden. It was happening. The daisy chain project was coming to life. Nathaniel had changed. The transformation was not loud or sudden, but a quiet, steady chipping away of the ice he had built around himself. The Black Wolf moniker was still used in the press, but those who worked closely with him saw a difference. He smiled more. He listened. He delegated multi-million-dollar decisions on his corporate ventures, but would spend an hour debating the best type of non-toxic paint for the toddler's art room with Tori. He had found a new kind of wealth, and it was revitalizing him. He was building something that had no share price, something that would generate not profit, but joy. He was honoring Catherine in the way she had always wanted. Tonight was a milestone. The Pinnacle restaurant, once the scene of Tori's deepest humiliation, was now hosting the first official fundraising gala for the Daisy Chain project. The room was filled with the city's elite, but the atmosphere was different. It wasn't about power plays or corporate mergers. A new purpose had been infused into the opulent space. Mr. Peterson approached them, his face no longer carved from granite, but softened with a genuine respect. "Miss Vance, Mr. Blackwood, everything is ready. The guests are eager to hear from you." Tori felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but it was different now. It was the thrill of purpose, not the terror of failure. She looked at Nathaniel, who gave her a subtle, encouraging nod. They walked to the small stage set up before the panoramic window. As Tori stepped up to the podium, she saw the faces in the crowd. Powerful, wealthy people, the kind who had watched her get fired 6 months ago. But tonight, they looked at her with respect, their checkbooks ready. "Good evening," Tori began, her voice clear and steady. "6 months ago, I walked into this very room for the first time. My goal was simple: to earn enough money to pay my rent. My first day ended in disaster, and I was fired by the man standing next to me." A ripple of surprised murmurs went through the crowd. Nathaniel didn't flinch. He simply watched her with a small, proud smile. "I was terrified, and I was humiliated," Tori continued. "But I was also carrying a promise my late mother, a nurse named Sophia, made to her dying friend, a woman named Catherine. That promise was contained in a letter I delivered to Mr. Blackwood that night. A letter that spoke of a different kind of success. Not the kind measured by stock tickers and headlines, but the kind measured in laughter, in creativity, in hope." She went on to describe the Daisy Chain project, her words painting a vivid picture of the haven it would become. She spoke of her mother and of Catherine, 2 women from different worlds united by a common dream. When she finished, she turned the podium over to Nathaniel. He stepped up, and for a moment he just looked out at the crowd, at the empire he had built. "For 17 years, he said, his voice resonating with quiet power. "I thought building taller towers and bigger companies was the way to honor the memory of my wife. I thought success was the only language that mattered." That night, 6 months ago, a young woman who I had wronged profoundly reminded me that the most important languages are compassion, courage, and kindness. Catherine's last wish wasn't for me to conquer the world, but to help heal a small piece of it. He looked directly at Tori. Victoria Vance didn't just deliver a letter. She delivered a second chance. The Pinnacle was once just the peak of my corporate ambition. Tonight, and for all nights to come, It will also serve as the foundation for this new purpose. The Blackwood Foundation will be matching every dollar raised tonight, 5 to 1. The room erupted in applause. It was a new chapter, not just for them, but for the legacy of the women who had brought them together. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Tori and Nathaniel stood by the window, watching the city lights glitter below. "You know," Tori said softly, "my mother always told me that every person is a story. You just have to be willing to listen." Nathaniel nodded, his gaze distant. "I had forgotten how. Thank you, Victoria, for making me listen." From the ashes of a disastrous first day, a beautiful partnership had been born. A humiliated waitress and a ruthless billionaire, brought together by a secret letter, were now building a legacy of hope, a chain of daisies in the concrete heart of the city, proving that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single, courageous act and a promise that could not be broken. From a catastrophic spill to the cornerstone of a foundation, Victoria Vance's journey was more than just a reversal of fortune. It was a testament to the power of a promise, the courage to speak up when all seems lost, and the capacity for change that lies dormant within even the hardest of hearts. Nathaniel Blackwood had the world at his feet, but it took a faded letter from the past, delivered by the woman he tried to cast aside, to show him what true wealth really was. Their story reminds us that, beneath the surface of our daily lives, there are hidden connections and untold stories waiting to unfold. It proves that one person's integrity can indeed change everything, turning a moment of utter humiliation into a lifetime of purpose. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will inspire and captivate you. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update.